Greetings, Father Mark signing on, continuing the history of Catholicism in the United States, moving into the Second New Deal. On November 9th, 1934, with midterm elections, Democrats gained 9 seats in the Senate and 9 seats in the House, which was taken as a public endorsement of the First New Deal. So FDR took that, continued promoting New Deal legislation with the 74th Congress, which opened on January 4th, 1935. The Second New Deal. April 8th, 1935, the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act created the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, renamed in 1939 the Works Projects Administration. Harry Hopkins was appointed administrator the following month on May 6, 1935. Essentially, this was another scheme for government-funded job creation during the Depression by expanding, creating a larger clone of the CCC, which we saw in a previous video was for young males between 18 and 25. So the WPA would employ adult males over the age of 25. And it lasted until the Second World War. It was terminated on June 30th, 1943. And between 1935 and 1943, so what is that, 8 years? It employed 8.5 million adult males over the age of 25. And they worked on projects costing $11 billion in 1935 money all over the country. For example, WPA projects included 651,000 miles of highways, roads, and streets, construction or renovation of 124,000 bridges, and 125,000 public buildings, 8,100 public parks, and 853 aircraft landing fields. The WPA, the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act, provided for salaries, and it included not only these, the visible, the infrastructure projects, as we say today, but also paid salaries for non-manual labor, such as musicians, artists, writers, actors. On May 11th, 1935, FDR issued an executive order stating that this flowed from powers granted to him in the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act to create the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA. Its purpose was to provide electricity to isolated rural areas not serviced by private utilities because it was not cost-effective for them to do so. This idea, FDR's idea, was to have been to replicate the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, throughout the nation. But fearing he did not have the support for such an endeavor in every state, he instead used the REA to lend to private and municipal utilities the entire cost of constructing power lines and transmission stations in order to provide electricity to rural areas that did not have enough money to make it profitable for the companies to do so if they were just to charge them fees. So the government subsidized, essentially subsidized this. August 14th, 1935. Now, I know you've heard of this one. The Social Security Act. It was in part a strategic move to lure moderates away from Huey P. Long's Share Our Wealth movement, as well as away from Father Charles Coughlin's National Union for Social Justice. It created a Social Security Board, later renamed to the Social Security Administration, which is still with us, to do the following. First, establish cooperative federal-state unemployment compensation. funded by a new tax on payrolls. The Social Security tax is a payroll tax. Second, provide old age and benefits for a surviving spouse insurance, funded by another tax. This one, a tax leveled on employees, with employers required to match. The proceeds were channeled into a federal fund to provide pensions to all individuals 65 years of age and older. Third, the Social Security Act authorized federal grants to states to meet costs not covered by taxation. Fourth, authorized additional grants to states to fund services to the blind, the homeless, physically crippled, and provide maternity and child care for the poor and, I know that this is not the proper term today, but at the time they referred to them as delinquent children, those who had broken some law. The Social Security Act in its day was widely resented by businesses, and it was challenged in the courts. But the tax features, which were the basis for the challenge, were upheld by the Supreme Court in the Stewart Machine Company versus Davis case, as well as the Helverine et al. Versus Davis in 1937. In 1935, October 7th, the U.S. Supreme Court held its first session in its new building, the one that you see now on the news, designed by Cass Gilbert. It was built on the site of an old Civil War prison. And it's, as I said, still in use today. Following year, September 1936, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli visited the United States. Significant because later, 3 years later, he would become Pope Pius XII, the Pope during the Second World War. Same year, November 3rd, 1936, FDR was elected to a second term. In his second term, he appointed a personal representative to the Holy See. On December 23rd, 1937, he appointed Myron Taylor. All right, now this is not ambassador, because the United States at that did not have full diplomatic relations with the Vatican until Ronald Reagan was president. So this is all right. FDR asked Francis Spellman, who's the Archbishop of New York, to hand-deliver a personal letter to Pope Pius after he became to Pope Pius XII, informing him that he was appointing Myron Taylor as a personal representative to the Holy See. This was not permanent. It was not official, as that would have required an act of Congress. But still, it was more than previous American presidents had done. The real agenda behind this was FDR hoped to persuade the Vatican to influence the government of Italy to keep Italy out of entering another European war, which all thinking people realized was inevitable by this point. Now, Taylor was not a diplomat. In fact, he couldn't be. He was not officially part of the State Department. He was independently wealthy, so he wouldn't need a salary appropriated by Congress. He owned a residence in Italy, a villa. He owned a villa in Florence. So who is this guy? All right. Myron Charles Taylor was born on January 18th, 1874 in New York. His father's name was William. His mother's name was Mary. His father owned and operated a tannery business. He attended and graduated from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and then Cornell Law School. He returned home to Lyons, New York, where he worked for the next 5 years, establishing a law practice. He twice ran for the New York State Assembly as a Democrat. Both times was defeated. In 1900, Taylor left to join his brother, Willard, on Wall Street in New York City. He turned his focus to practicing corporate law as a member of the firm of DeForest Brothers, the DeForest Brothers. Myron Taylor was recruited to help turn around the finances of U.S. Steel. was one of the largest steel producers and one of the largest corporations in the world. On September 15, 1925, Myron was elected a director and a member of the powerful Finance Committee of U.S. Steel. He became the committee chairman in 1929. From 1932 to 1938, he was chairman of U.S. Steel and simultaneously the chief executive officer, the CEO. In July of 1938, he represented the United States at the Evian Conference in France, which was convened at the initiative of FDR to discuss the issue of the increasing numbers of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. On December 22, 1939, FDR asked Myron Taylor to take on a special mission for him, to be his personal envoy to the Holy See. Myron Taylor's served for the rest of Roosevelt's presidency until Roosevelt died in 1949, so through the Second World War, and continued. Roosevelt's last vice president and successor was Harry Truman, so Truman continued that personal envoy status. And Taylor continued in this until 1950, 1939 to 1950. I mean, not an official ambassador and not being paid, just them. His appointment to that position, well, even though it was not official from the United States side, the Vatican recognized him as an ambassador, but the United States, ironically, did not recognize him as an ambassador. Anyway, Myron Taylor is credited, at least in specialized literature that follows this kind of stuff, that he was one of those instrumental in persuading Spain's dictator, Francisco Franco, to remain neutral during the Second World War, and not because the fear was, the assumption was that he would ally with Hitler and Mussolini, but he didn't. Myron Taylor later successfully lobbied Portugal, which had another dictator but remained neutral. He successfully persuaded them to allow an Allied air base in Portugal, even though Portugal remained neutral. He resigned from this position in January of 1950. And Truman So the U.S. did not have a formal ambassador, that it recognizes an ambassador with full diplomatic rank until 1984, when Reagan was president. As for Myron Taylor, he lived out retired. His wife died in 1958, and he died 5 months later in 1959 at his home in New York City, aged 85. Okay. All right, the lead up to the Second World War. The European phase started on September 1st, 1939, so we will pause here and pick up with that next time in the next video. So for now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.